Child by Floyd Dell. Chapter 16. The Child as Artist. In this matter, most decidedly we need expert advice. Let us start with beauty. The one who best understands beauty is undoubtedly the artist. Let us call in the artist. Will you question him, or shall I? You prefer to do it yourself, I see. Very well, then. But please try to get to the point as soon as possible. What we want to know is this. Is it possible to teach the child to become an artist? He is an artist already. What do you mean? Just what I say. The child is an artist, and the artist is always a child. The greatest periods of art have always been those in which artists had a direct, naive, unspoiled vision of the child. The aim of our best artists today is to recover that vision. They are trying to see the world as children see it, and to record their vision of it as a child will do. Have you ever looked at children's drawings? Not the sort of things they are taught to do by mistaken and mischievous adults, but the pictures that are the natural expressions of their creative impulses. And haven't you observed that modern paintings are coming to be more and more like such pictures? Well, yes, I had noticed something of the kind, but is that sort of thing necessarily art? I mean, well, I don't want to attempt to argue with you on a subject in which you are an expert, but, oh, that's all right. The modern artist is ready to discuss art with anybody. The more ignorant of the subject, the better. You see, we want art to cease to be the possession of a caste. We want it to belong to everybody. As a member of the human race, your opinions are important to us. That is very kind of you. I fear it is rather in the nature of a digression, but since I may ask, without fear of seeming presumptuous, are those horrid misshapen green nudes of Matisse and those cubical blocks of paint by, I forget his name, and all that sort of thing, are they your notion of what art should be? Mine? Oh, not at all. They are merely 2 out of 1,000 contemporary attempts to recover the naive, childlike vision of which I spoke. If you will compare them with a child's drawing, or with a picture by Navajo Indian, or with a sketch of an aurochs traced on the walls of his cave by one of our remote ancestors, you will note an essential difference. Those artists were not trying to be naive and childlike. They were naive and childlike. The chief merit of our modern efforts, in my personal opinion, is in their quality as a challenge to traditional and mistaken notions of what art should be. An advertisement, startling enough and sometimes maliciously startling, of the artist's belief that he has the right to be first of all an artist. Now we are coming to the point. What is an artist? I told you, a child. And by that, I mean one who plays with his materials, not one who performs a set and perhaps useful task with them. A creator. But a creator of what? Not of beauty, by any chance? Incidentally, of beauty? There we seem to disagree. If those horrid pictures, suppose you tell me what beauty is. It seems to me quite simple. Beauty is, well, a thing is either beautiful or it isn't. And just so, the only trouble is that so few of us are able to agree whether it is or isn't. You yourself have doubtless changed your opinions about what is beautiful many times in the course of your career as an art lover. And the time may come when you will cherish some horrid nude of Matisse's as your dearest possession. Let us admit like the wise old poet, that beauty is not a thing which can be argued about. It can only be produced. But if we don't know what beauty is, how can we produce it? I have already told you, as the incidental result of creative effort. Effort to create what? Oh, anything? Are you joking? I never was more serious in my life, and I should really inform you that I am merely repeating the familiar commonplaces of modern aesthetics. Beauty is the incidental result of the effort to create a house, a sword, or a shoe. Yes, I have some peasant shoes from Russia, which are very beautiful. You can see shoes which are works of art in any good museum, but hardly in any boot shop window. Those shoes were not created. They were done as a set task. They were not made by peasants or craftsmen for pleasure. They were made by wage slaves who did them only because they must. Do not for a moment imagine that it is the difference in materials or shape that matters. It is the difference in the spirit with which they are made. I have seen modern shoes which are works of art because they were made by a bootmaker who is an artist and does what pleases himself. Do they please anybody else? Eh? Would you be seen wearing them? Would I be seen drinking my coffee from a cup that had been turned on a wheel by a man who loved the feel of the clay under his fingers and who knew just the right touch to give the brim? Was Richard Coeur de Lion's sword less a sword because it had been made by an artist who dreamed over the steel instead of by a tired man in a hurry? I cannot afford to wear shoes made by my bootmaker artist friend, but I wish I could, for they fit. Will you give me his address? I beg your pardon. Please go on. I was about to say you wrong the artist if you think that he is not interested in utility. It is only because utility has become bound up with slavery that artists and people with artistic impulses revolt against it and in defiance produce utterly and fantastically useless things. This will be so as long as being useful means being a slave. But art is not an end in itself. It had its origin and will find its destiny in the production of useful things, for example. Yes, do let us get down to the concrete. Suppose you are out walking in a hilly country and decide to whittle yourself a stick. Your wish is to make something useful, but you can't help making it more than useful. You can't help it because if you are not in a hurry and nobody else is bossing the job, you find other impulses besides the utilitarian one coming in to elaborate your task. Shall I name those impulses? If you will. I am not a psychologist, but I would call them the impulse to command and the impulse to obey. To command and obey what? Your material, whatever it is, paint and canvas, words, sounds, clay, marble, iron, in this case, the stick of wood. I'm afraid I do not quite. The impulse to command comes first. The impulse to just show that stick who is master. The desire to impose your imperial will upon it. I suppose you might call it vanity, and that impulse alone would result in your making something fantastic and grotesque or strikingly absurd and yet beautiful in its way. But it is met and checked by the other impulse, the impulse to obey. No man that ever whittled wood but has felt that impulse. He feels that he must not do simply what he wants to do, but also what the wood wants done to it. The real artist does not care to treat marble as if it were soft, nor paint and canvas as though they were three-dimensional. He could if he wanted to, but he respects his medium. There is an instinctive pleasure in letting it have its way. I suppose you might call it reverence. And this vanity and this reverence, the desire to command and the desire to obey, when they are set free in the dream and effort of creation, produce something which is more than useful. That something more is what we call beauty. Do you care to have me go further into the mechanics of beauty? Well, I suppose now that we have got this far into the subject, we might as well get to the end of it. Go on. What I am about to tell you is the only really important thing about art. Unfortunately, the facts at issue have never been studied by first-class scientific minds, and so they lack a proper terminology to make them clear. In default of such a scientific terminology, we are forced to use the word rhythm in the special sense in which artists understand it. You speak of the movements of a dance as being rhythmic. The artist understands the word to refer to the relation of these movements to each other, and above all, to the emotion which they express. And to him, the whole world is a dance full of rhythmic gestures. The gesture of standing still or of being asleep is also rhythmic. The body is itself a gesture. He will speak of the rhythm of the line of a lifted arm or a bent knee. Trees that lift their branches to the sky and rocks that sleep on the ground have their rhythms. Every tree and every rock its own special rhythm. The rhythm of a pine tree is different from that of a palm. The rhythm of granitic rocks different from that of limestone. So far, the matter is simple enough, but the relations of these rhythms to each other are also rhythmic. These relations are, in fact, so manifold that they constitute a chaos. But in this chaos, each person feels a different rhythm, and according as he has the power, transmits his sense of it to us through a rhythmic treatment of his medium. In the presence of his work, we feel what he has felt about the world, but we feel something more than that. We feel also the rhythm of the struggle in the artist between his impulse to command and his impulse to obey. Our own impulses of vanity and of reverence go out to welcome his power and his faithfulness. And just as there are gay rhythms and sad rhythms in the gesture of movement, so there are magnificent rhythms and trivial rhythms in the gesture of a soul facing the chaos of the world. What has he found worthwhile to play with, and how has he played with it? What kind of creator is he? Ability to feel and express significant rhythm, that is 9/10 of art. But, my dear fellow, how are we teach all this to children? Very simply, by giving them a knife and a piece of wood. Well, really. And crayons and clay and singing games and so forth. But perhaps you prefer to show them pictures of alleged masterpieces and tell them, this is great art. They won't believe you, of course. And they will hate great art ever afterwards, just as they hate great poetry, and for the same excellent reason, because presented to them in that way, it is nothing but a damned nuisance. Yet the child who enjoys hearing and telling a story has in him the capacity to appreciate and perhaps to create the greatest of stories. And the child who enjoys whittling a block of wood has in him the capacity to appreciate and perhaps to create the greatest art. Then you do not think children can be taught to appreciate art by looking at photographic reproductions of it? I would hardly expect a Fiji Islander to become an appreciator of civilized music by letting him look at my phonograph records. The dingy brownish photograph of a gloriously colored painting has even less educational value, for it lies about the original. Do you know that there are thousands and thousands of American school children who think that the great masterpieces of the world's painting are the color of axle grease? They are never told that their own free efforts with colored crayons are more like Botticelli in every sense than any photograph could possibly be. But it is true. But don't you want them to respect Botticelli? No, I want them to look at Botticelli's pictures as they look at those of another child, free to criticize, free to dislike, free to scorn. For only when you are free to despise are you free to admire. After all, who was Botticelli? Another child. Perhaps they may prefer Goya or the Sunday comic supplement. A healthy taste, and if they know what drawing is, though having used the pencil themselves, they will prefer the better comic pictures to the worse, and be ready to appreciate Goya and Daumier, who were the super Sunday supplement comic artists of their day. Left to themselves, they may come to like Goya, as you say, but will they ever come to appreciate such a masterpiece as Leonardo's Last Supper without some more formal teaching? Do you call it teaching to talk solemnly to children in language they cannot understand? If they are making pictures themselves and being assisted in their enthusiastic experiments by a real artist instead of a teacher, and perhaps they will get some of their friends' enthusiasm, and perhaps not, but they will know that the real human being who is like themselves does like that picture. But it makes no difference whether they like it or not. You can't compel them to like it, can you? You can only compel them to pretend that they do. Can't you teach them what is called good taste? Only too easily, and their good taste will lead them infallibly to prefer the imitations of what they've been taught to praise, and quite as infallibly to reject the great new art of their generation. They will think some new Whistler a pot of paint flung in the public's face, and the next Cézanne a dauber. Then you don't approve of good taste? Every artist despises it, and the people who have it. We know quite well that the people who pretend to like Titian and Turner, because they have been carefully taught that it is the thing to do, would have turned up their noses at Titian and Turner in their own day, because they were not on the list of dead artists whom it was the fashion to call great. They know, moreover, that these same people of good taste are generally incapable of distinguishing between a beautiful and an ugly wallpaper, between a beautiful and an ugly plate, or even between a beautiful and an ugly necktie. Outside the bounds of their memorized list, they have no taste whatever. Cannot good taste be taught so as to include the whole of life? It would take too much time, and thank God for that. For good taste is simply a polite pretense by which we cover up our lack of that real sense of beauty, which comes only from intimate acquaintance with creative processes. The most cultivated people in the world cannot produce beauty by merely having notions about it. But the most uncultivated people in the world cannot help producing beauty if only they have time to dream as they work, if only they have freedom to let their work become something besides utilitarian. You think then that education should not concern itself with good taste, but rather with creative effort? Exactly. You say that children are artists already, and that artists are children, then the task of education in respect to them would seem to be easy. No, on the contrary, infinitely hard. What do you mean? I have said that children are artists and that artists are children. The task of education is to help them to grow up. New difficulties, and tremendous ones. But if I am to discuss them, you must keep still for a while and let me talk in my own fashion. Very well. Ladies and gentlemen, shall we adjourn for lunch? And when we reassemble here, give the artist the platform for half an hour? What is the sentiment of the meeting? The ayes have it.